Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to our Zoom New Year's Eve service here at the virtual space of Congregation Shereth Israel in San Francisco. I'm Rabbi Abby Phelps. I'm joined here this evening by Cantor Toby Glaser and our tech guru, Zach Migdale. And we're so excited that you have chosen to spend a little bit of your New Year's Eve praying and enjoying Shabbat with us. We want to invite to extend you an extra welcome from our Board of Trustees, one of the trustees, Richard Johns. So please go ahead and unmute yourself, Richard, and say hello.
Well, thank you very much. Hello to everyone. It's really an honor to be here at the last Shabbat of the year, to be here with all of you. And, you know, we've had a tough year at Shereth Israel in some ways, but we've had a very, very rewarding year in other ways. Participation has changed, but it's been great and it's been enthusiastic. And now, you know, as the nights get shorter and the days get longer, and we've had some rain and we've had some sunshine, it looks like things may be in pretty good shape for the next year. So welcome to all of you. It's wonderful to see you here, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Amen. Thank you for that reflection, Richard. I will add, it has been a challenging year, I imagine, for many of us, for people all across the globe, and of course, a rewarding year in many respects. But I'm reminded of that reading that I think appears in Mishkan Tefillah in the Saturday morning, the preface to the Saturday morning liturgy, that talks about how each of us walks into the synagogue with a different need. And that has felt especially resonant this year. Some of us have had wildly divergent experiences in terms of how COVID has affected us, how various goings on politically have affected us, how things in our families have been. So whatever it is that you need from Shabbat this week, whether it's rest and relaxation, whether it's celebration, whether it's solace, we hope we can help you to find a little bit of that this evening with us. We're going to start our service by lighting our Shabbat candles. There are a few folks out there who I know have candles ready to go. I think Luke has some candles that are visible. I think Eric Sapphire does. I think Chris and Janet do. So if we can spotlight some subset of those people, then perhaps those folks can light candles on our behalf. Yes, and we have the Cantor too, who also has candles, but we'll have to put them to the side in a moment.
Yes, they are being lit, but not near the.
Shira as well, I see. Very good. Go ahead and light your candles whenever you're ready.
Let's bring in that light as we recite our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner Shel Shabbat.
Beautiful candles. Thank you, everyone who lit on behalf of those folks who don't have candles ready to hand. We're going to take a moment now to imagine ourselves back into the mystical area of Tzfat in Israel, to imagine ourselves going out into the field and welcoming and embracing Shabbat as our beloved with Lecha Dodi. If you are looking in the chat, you'll see that Zach Migdale put the prayer book, an online version of the prayer book, into the chat. You can click that link to access it. And if you are following along, you can find Lecha Dodi on page 20.
And here we go to welcome Shabbat. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat Kabbalat. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. שמור וזכור בדיבורך, ישמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולי תהילה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. לקראת שבת לכוונך, כי היא מקום הברכה. מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבת תחילה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי. שורי אורי, שדברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה. Rise to greet the Shabbat angels. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה. תוך אמונה אף סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה שבת לקבלה. Lecha Dodi לקראת כלה פני שבת לקבלה.
We invite you now to rise as we formally call one another to prayer with the Barhu, which you can find on page 28.
Here we go with our Baruch. Yai, dai, dai. Oh, sorry, apologies. We have our caper on. That's why we weren't getting the key right. Let's take it down a little bit. Apologies, everyone. It was the wrong key. Here we go. Yada dai dai dai, 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 yada dai ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד, לעולם ועד. ידעי
We join together in Ahavat Olam, our prayer of thanksgiving for God's love, which is shown to us through the beauty of creation, through our relationships with each other, and through the mitzvot and the Torah, our sacred heritage. You can find Ahavat Olam on page 32.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו וקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו ובהם נגן יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
Please be seated. We continue with the Ve'ahavta on page 36.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. היו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיבה בם בשבתך ביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Just last week, we started the book of Exodus, Shemot in Hebrew. This week we are continuing. The Parsha that we read this week, Vayera, contains, among other things, the moment of God commissioning Moses to set the people free. It contains Moses's pleas to Pharaoh asking that the Israelites be freed and being denied, and it contains the first of the 10 plagues. So it's appropriate that in this part of our service, every time we meet, we take a moment to reflect on that experience of tribulation in Egypt and on the tremendous joy and power of going free and ending the oppression we experienced. We commemorate that as we wish also for the freedom of all people throughout the world. We sing Mi Chamocha together, which you can find on page 40.
מי כמוך בעלים אדוני, מי כמוך נאמן בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כבד אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
In the prayer Hashkivenu, we thank God for extending a sukkah of shalom, a shelter of peace over all of us, something which is both easier to feel when we are safely inside our homes and in a way harder to feel because the connection between us is a little harder to sense and to locate. But here we all are in this virtual space together, sharing in that shelter of peace. Please join us in singing Hashkivenu, which you can find on page 43.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. Amen. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Amen.
When we come together in prayer, we have the opportunity to pray for one another's healing, something which I think all of us could probably use on this Shabbat to a greater or lesser degree. It has, as we have mentioned already, been a challenging year. We have all performed as admirably as we could throughout it, but I'm sure we can all use the well wishes of this community. And of course, there are some in our community who are especially in need of healing of mind, body, or spirit. We think particularly this evening of Aharon Ben Tzvi, Shoshana Chana Asher, Sharon Carmen, Jeremy Frick, Michael Gaines, Mikiko Huang, William Kurian, Monica Levin, Carolyn Resnikoff, Agnes Rothblatt, and Annette Weiner. And to those names, we add any names that you are sharing in your own homes or that you might wish to share in the chat. We join together in Misha Berach, which you can find in your prayer books on page 253.
מקור הברכה אמותינו, may the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misheperach imotenu, mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We now rise once more for the Amidah, the standing prayer. You can find the beginning of the Amidah, Adonai Sefatai, in your prayer books on page 46.
Yadai dai dai, yadai dai 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 dai dai. Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi yagir tilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Yadai dai dai dai, 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 yadai dai dai dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, ve'Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim ve'Konei Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה הכל אתה, רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיה הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, ומען אתה לחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני, חיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום הללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Please take a few moments for your own prayers, and when you have completed your prayers, you may go ahead and be seated. If you were with us on the Zoom last week, then you may remember that I started my drash last week with a little informal poll. The question last week was about how many folks were planning to have or were already having some Chinese food in honor of Christmas. I have a slightly different question this time. I'm curious, I'll ask it both ways. I'm curious how many folks who are visible now, just show of hands, are people who enjoy secular New Year's Eve? All right, a few. And how many folks are people who really don't enjoy secular New Year's Eve? Not as many as I thought. Okay, a little bit of a split. And some people are mixed on the question. Well, that's understandable. Christmas is always a little bit of a strange and challenging time to be Jewish in predominantly Christian countries like ours. Yes, there's an ambivalent category, and I will mark you for it, Zach. But I think New Year's is at least as strange, if not a little stranger. There's something to me at least, a little alienating about the idea that we're about to celebrate a new year when we just got finished celebrating our new year a few months ago. And we did serious spiritual work at that time. We did cheshbon hanefesh, we searched our souls. We really made meaningful resolutions about how to be better people in the new year. And none of that precludes us from participating in the spirit of tonight and in the celebration of tonight, but it does make it feel at least a little bit different for us. So as I was thinking about that, I went looking in various places for articles, essays, reflections on how Jews might approach the secular New Year. I keep putting that in quotes, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And I kind of found more than I bargained for. So I found a sort of incredible article, and I'm going to paste a link to it in the chat. It's written by somebody who is mostly, I think, a political pundit. His name is Adam Garfinkel, and he's written this article called, he actually wrote it a couple of years ago, called A Jew's Guide to New Year's Eve. And it was full of all kinds of information that I had not been aware of. So I want to share some of it with you in hopes that the same will be true for you. And he starts by posing a question and then answering it that it had not even occurred to me to ask. And the question is, why is it New Year's Eve on December 31st? Because I think most of us, when we think about New Year's Eve, just think, well, of course it is. That's what the calendar is. But the calendar has not always been this way. So I will share with you now a little bit of what he has to say on this topic. So he offers us the history starting all the way back with Julius Caesar. And he says, in about 46 or 45 BCE, Julius Caesar established January 1st as New Year's Day, even as he introduced a new calendar that was far more accurate than the one Rome had been using up to that point. The old calendar had only 304 days divided among only 10 months. Not so good if you want to concord solar and lunar cycles, or have years that are roughly symmetrical astronomically from one to the next. Caesar named January after the Roman god of doors and gates, Janus, who had two faces, one looking forward and one looking backward, which was a pretty terrific idea. Before long, Roman pagans began marking December 31st with wild revelries. I'm paraphrasing him a little bit. They rationalized their debauchery by claiming that it constituted a solemn reenactment of the chaotic void that existed before the gods brought order to the cosmos. This, by the way, I think, is a particularly interesting revelation, since there's an awful lot of Jewish tradition that teaches that the cosmos was created similarly, that essentially creation was an act of God imposing order on primordial chaos. However, Garfinkel's commentary is, well, even back then, people made up excuses to party. It's good to know that some things don't change. He goes on to say, though, that December 31st and January 1st did not remain the start of the year for very long, because as Christianity spread and then became the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380, pagan holidays were either incorporated into the Christian calendar or abandoned. In the case of January 1st, it was incorporated, becoming the festival of the Circumcision, because if you count inclusively from December 25th to January 1st, you get 8, as in 8 days of circumcision. Some of you are nodding. Clearly, some of you had thought of this already. I had not. So I found this to be a very interesting insight, but I'll go on. January 1st, of course, then became a very important day in early Christianity, but not as New Year's Day. The festival of the Circumcision came to symbolize the triumphal rise and reign of Christianity and the would-be death of Judaism, the supersession of the church over the Jews as God's chosen people. By the time of the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, this interpretation was standard fare and seems to have been formally ratified theologically at that council. Now, it so happens that the Pope at the time, whose name was Sylvester, convinced Constantine to prohibit Jews from living in Jerusalem. At the Council of Nicaea, too, Sylvester promulgated a host of new anti-Semitic legislation. Sylvester became a saint in the church for this and other achievements, and his saint's day is, you guessed it, January 1st. And that's why Israelis and Europeans and many other folks today called the secular New Year's Eve revelries and New Year's Day Sylvester. This is a slightly strange thing for Israelis to do, since Sylvester was very problematic from a Jewish point of view, and since in medieval Europe, the night of December 31st was often reserved for synagogue and Hebrew book burnings and anti-Jewish violence. But this term was undoubtedly imported from Europe, where it's still used for that purpose in many places. Now, already by that time, however, January 1st was not New Year's Day anymore. That connection was still associated with Caesar's pagan Rome, and Christians wanted to separate themselves from that unenlightened pre-gospel, pre-Christian time. So Christian Europe regarded March 25th, Annunciation Day, as the beginning of the year. And that made sense because it was near the vernal equinox, which is the new year for many of the European tribes that the church sought to convert. The one exception worth noting, starting in the 11th century, was England. William the Conqueror was crowned King of England on December 25th, 1066. And at that time, he decreed that January 1st should once again be the new year. He thus ensured that with Jesus's birthday aligning with his coronation, Jesus's circumcision would start at the new year and symbolize the supersession of the Normans over the earlier Saxon inhabitants of Britain. He tried, in other words, to make the calendar of Christian Norman England align with his personal biography. Now, this was pretty clever, but William's innovation eventually lost favor. England's Catholic clergy in time realigned English custom to fit that of the rest of the Christian West, and March 25th became the marker once again of the new year. And there it remained for roughly half a millennium. Then, in 1582, there will not be a quiz, you don't have to remember these dates. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII moved it back to January 1st. Like Caesar, the occasion was the introduction of a new calendar, which is of course the eponymous Gregorian calendar that we use today. The problem with the Julian calendar, as is well known, is that its slight inaccuracy caused Easter to creep too far back from the vernal equinox at the rate of about 1 day per century. And that creep had amounted to 14 days by the time Gregory became Pope, which really messed up the religious calendar and the general sense of right-fittedness as well. Because what you really want are lilies and daffodils blooming on Easter, not a foot of snow on the ground. Thus, January 1st, once again, became the new year, except in England, and by extension, in its colonies. The English resisted the change, not because they were still mad at William the Conqueror, but for reasons having to do with the Reformation and thinking it apposite to resist the Pope's authority. The Gregorian calendar did not win adoption in England and hence in America until 1752. And what a mess that caused. As one can learn from Ben Franklin's almanac of that time, to get the math to work, 1751 consisted of only 282 days, from March 25th to December 31st. The year 1752 began on January 1st, but January 1st had to be advanced 11 days to catch up with the Gregorian count, so 1752 only had 355 days. Perhaps this is the origin, the real origin of all the partying in Britain and America on New Year's Eve, because how else is anybody supposed to cope with all of this? Now, having explained this long and complicated history of the shifting new year, Garfinkel goes on to ask, well, does any of this really matter anymore? Very few Jews know this history, whether they live in Israel or America or anywhere else. And very few non-Jews in the United States or Canada associate New Year's Eve and January 1st with Pope Sylvester or with the festival of the Circumcision, or know that January 1st became New Year's Day in British North America only in 1752. Indeed, the whole shebang is presumed by most Americans to be wholly secular in nature. Except that, as ought now to be clear, New Year's origins very much do go back to church calendars and to pre-Christian religious rituals as well. Besides, if New Year's Eve or New Year's Day really were secular in origin, they could not be much older than a few centuries, In other words, not older than the notion of secularism itself. So that sure contradicts the "it's always been this day" premise. Having said all of this, Garfinkel comes to the following conclusion. It comes down to this: if you join in the revelry of New Year's Eve, you can do it for any number of historically appropriate reasons. You can do it because of Julius Caesar and the gods turning chaos to cosmos. You can do it in memory of Pope Sylvester or William the Conqueror, which are perhaps not the most appealing options for Jews. You can do it to mark the advent of Pope Gregory's much improved calendar. You can do it to celebrate Jesus's bris, or you can do it just because it's a convenient opportunity to throw a party. So, having read this, for me, quite revelatory article, I came to a few different conclusions, because I think one can learn all of this information about the fluctuations in the new year and about its Christian origins and its pre-Christian pagan origins before that, and arrive at a lot of different conclusions. And I certainly can understand, aside from just concluding that truth is stranger than fiction and history is hopelessly complicated, I can certainly understand, concluding from all this, that in fact, New Year's is a particularly alienating time to be Jewish, that it's challenging to be connected to something which is ostensibly secular, but which we know to in fact have deeply Christian roots, and in fact to be tied up with many instances of anti-Jewish action and violence in the past. I think that's a perfectly reasonable response, but if you know me, then you probably know that's not exactly where my head went. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my thoughts. The first is that all of this history does remind us that Christianity is really everywhere culturally, at least in this country and in the West. I once got into an argument with a college professor in an ethics class because he challenged me on whether my outlook on the world was in fact more Christian or more Jewish. And he was making the case that it was more Christian inherently just by virtue of me being American, because growing up in an American framework teaches us Christian values. Now, at the time, I pushed back very hard on this conclusion, but I understand now where he's coming from. And I don't think this is always an enormous problem. There are very beautiful things about Christianity. There are wonderful Christians who are part of our community. We have Christian brothers and sisters whom we work with in solidarity all the time. But it is a useful reminder that even things that we routinely think of as being secular often do have Christian roots, and that Christian values and mindsets influence us all more than we might typically realize. So what I draw from that is just that if we want to think and live Jewishly, we have to really make an effort to learn and to practice and to do what you're all doing tonight, which is to surround ourselves with Jewish community. That being said, this article also reminded me that syncretism, the practice of combining different forms of belief and practice, is also everywhere. And as long as we're aware of that, I don't think we need to be too concerned about it or to avoid it. It's clearly part of New Year's Eve, in that the fact that December 31st is the new year traces its origins to Rome, to Christianity, and to Judaism, insofar as it has to do with Jesus's ostensible bris. But it's in our traditions too. One of the places where I see it most prominently is in Hanukkah. And one of my favorite things to teach people about Hanukkah is that Hanukkah is the celebration of our escape from the tyranny of Hellenistic customs and our freedom to practice Judaism as we wish, which we honor through a Hellenic celebration of our victory, because to have a feast every year to celebrate your military victory is something we borrowed from the Greeks. So there's a little irony mixed right into Hanukkah there. And I think if we look hard enough at a lot of our customs, we'll find syncretism of all sorts there. And I think syncretism is something that is as much additive as anything else. It brings great richness to our tradition, and it brings great richness from us to other traditions too. So I think it's important to be mindful of it, but I think we should also feel free to embrace it. And as the world grows more and more interconnected, as identity grows more and more layered and complex and interwoven, I think that embracing the interactions between Judaism and the non-Jewish world is going to become something that serves us even more. So in that spirit, I want to wish everybody in this room a Shabbat Shalom and also a happy New Year's Eve, whatever you choose to do later this evening. With that,
Shabbat
we will.
Shalom, Shalom, and Happy New Year's Eve indeed. Yes.
Shabbat
Sorry, I was
Shalom.
just
Sorry.
trying to unmute there and too many things.
Well, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude our Jewish service. We're going to join together in the Aleinu, which is the prayer where we remind ourselves and each other that it is Aleinu, it is on us to create a perfected world. So please rise and join us for the Aleinu on page 282.
Yes. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הרצון, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המותנם. ואנחנו קוראים ומתרחבים ומודים לפני מלך המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. אמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
You may be seated. Our thoughts now turn to those who have departed this earth. Our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and every nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. On this Shabbat, we remember for Shloshim, for the first 30 days of mourning, Jay Kovton, Patricia Mednick, and Cynthia Schumann. If you're observing Shiva or Shloshim this Shabbat, the first 7 or 30 days of mourning for a loved one, please rise and share their name with us. And if you are in the first year of mourning for a loved one, please also rise and share that name in the chat. The Perpetual Memorials in our community are Ingrid Apter, Dr. Elliot Eisenberg, Judy Migdale, Leon Mervis, Harold Weiss, and Joanne May Weiss. And in the Shabbat, we also observe the following yard sites. Remember Emily K. Alschuler, Louise Brownell, Julian Davis, Irving Feynman, Marcella Flanzer, Saul Golden, Nathan Greenspan, Martin Gruskin, Zoya Kagan, Shirley Moskowitz, Adolf Rosenberg, Jack Schaefer, Leona Tepper, Marilyn Wenzel, and David Wine. To those names, we add the names of those you are remembering this Shabbat. Feel free to share those names in the chat, as many of you already have. I invite you all to rise now as one community as we join together in the Mourner's Kaddish, which you can find on page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, v'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uvyomechon, v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran ba'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya, B'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Aseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru Amen. May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel and to all the world. And together we say, Amen. Please be seated. Well, it's the very end of the year, December 31st. It is a quiet time still for Congregation Shereth Israel. The major announcement I have to give is just that we're going to hold off on meeting for Torah study for one more week. We're going to assume that folks have things to do and places to be on New Year's Day, but we will be excited to see you all a week from tomorrow for Torah study. Cantor Glaser, do you have anything to announce other than that we should do Shehechianu now because I missed it earlier?
No, that was one of my segues intended, but no, absolutely not. I think just Happy New Year, everybody, and that's very exciting. And yeah, do we want to do Shehechianu, or do we want to try and find some Shehechianu moments now?
Yeah, I think let's do that. I think it's appropriate at any rate on New Year's Eve to save the Shehechianus for the end because it's a time of celebration anyway, ostensibly.
Exactly. Or
so,
New Year's blessings for Shehechianu. You know, I think this is very much. Well, I guess Shehechianu is when we do something for the first time, but also the last time. You know, we can say Shehechianu on 2021.
And my understanding is also that we're meant to say Shehechianu when we're hopeful that the thing that's occurring now, however special it may be, may occur yet again. So given that we would like to see another year happen in another year, I think it's very appropriate to be doing Shehechianu on the Shabbat.
Good point. Yes, absolutely. We do ideally want another year after this one. We'll see how we go.
Does anyone have any particular simchas that they'd like to share? You can put a hand up, you can write something in the chat. I'm excited that we've all made it to the end of 2021 and into 2022, or at least we nearly have, we will have very soon.
I have a simcha.
Please.
I have a milestone birthday on Monday.
Yay. Ooh, would you like to share what it is, or would you like to keep that to yourself?
Well,
it's really big.
It's 70.
Oh my goodness.
Birthday.
Happy almost birthday. That's wonderful.
I'm happy to be here at age 70.
We're happy to have you. Admea Esrim, I will say, on Rabbi Graf's behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, Monique says she had a conversation with her sister. That sounds good. I need to have one of those with my sister. Let's see, anybody else? Luke has a funny t-shirt.
Got a COVID booster shot.
Ah, wonderful. Well, a hearty Shehechianu for everybody who's had a COVID booster shot or everybody who has one upcoming that is scheduled. And if you don't have one already and you don't have one scheduled, then I highly encourage you to do so. Oh, that's very exciting, Luke, that you have the letters for your top surgery. Good. Mazal tov. Well, those are
I
quite
have
a lot.
something.
Yeah. Oh, please go ahead, Julie.
But I don't think my picture's showing up. At least
It's not, but we can
here.
hear you fine.
Anyways, the annual fund thermometer blew its top just in time for New Year's Eve. It's a big bang, and we're well above it. And all thanks to all of you for being wonderful donors to the annual fund, and hoo-ha, yay, yay, you know, and etc. All good.
Thank you, Julie. That is an important announcement, and well done, everybody.
Yes, drop the ball on the annual fund. That's the
Yeah, absolutely.
The excellent.
Mic drop too.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Julie.
Well, in honor of all of those simchas, why don't we join together in a Shehechianu?
Yes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen ואמן.
Amen. We're going to conclude our service now with Kiddush and Motzi. So anybody who has a Kiddush cup, go ahead and hold it up so that we can all see. I see Bill reaching for one. I see Chris has one. I see Julie has one, all kinds of up. I see Robert and Pearl both have them. all
Be good.
kinds of folks with Kiddush cups. So hold them up high and we'll join together in Kiddush.
Yes. Well, I
I
figured
hope champagne counts.
Exactly.
yeah.
So for our New Year's Kiddush, we I bought a bottle especially of well, you know, it's only champagne if you make Kiddush in the Champagne region. Otherwise, it's sparkling white Kiddush. But I bought some sparkling wine. So let's pop this and make Kiddush on 2021. I get it now close to the mic. There we go. Hey, all right. And for Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu ושבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחילנו זיכרון למעשה וראשית כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. אמן. לחיים.
L'chaim. Enjoy your wine and or champagne.
Yes, and do we have any chalot to display?
That's my favorite part of every Zoom service, the part where we get to see everyone's chalot and be envious of them. Ah, yes. Nancy never fails to display. Ooh, Pearl and Robert have some sort of beautiful tiny challah. I like it. But Nancy has a beautiful big one as well. So I'm sure lots of folks have good ones. So go ahead and hold your chalot up and we'll join together in Hamotzi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. B'te'avon.
Yavon. We're going to conclude our service as we so often do with Oseh Shalom, a prayer for peace, especially on this eve of the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022, the renewal of the annual cycle, the renewal of our own approaches to our lives. I hope that we feel and are able to spread to others as much peace as possible. So please join us for Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן. Happy New Year, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Happy New Year and Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, everyone. Happy
Feel
New
free to
Year.
unmute. Send some blessings to your community.
Shalom, everyone. Have a safe and happy new year.
Yes.
Yes,
Take care,
amen.
everyone.
Bye-bye.